Hi, my name's Keith Cooper of Northlight Images, and in this video I'm having a look at third-party inks because somebody just asked me the other day, Keith, why do you never test, why do you never recommend third-party inks in inkjet printers? Well, there's quite complex reasons for it, and I'm going to go through some of the reasons, and I will come back to some positives for third-party inks, just in case people think I'm a complete downer on them and I think you shouldn't touch them with a barge pole, which in some instances I would say is true. Now I'm going to look at ink cartridges and also ink tank printers because there are differences and things, but essentially there are three reasons, well there's a fourth I'll come to, but there are three reasons I don't test third-party inks in printers. First of all, it basically gives up on your warranty. Now you might say how a Epson, Canon, what to know that I've put a third-party ink in a printer? Well, I don't know, but you'll find out if it goes off for service, and it's obvious. Yeah, so that's one area. It depends, on your attitude to the cost of a printer, and of course the warranty that you've got with it. Now the 8550 that we got last year came with a 5-year warranty. That's quite a useful thing. But right, so warranty, probably. What about profiles? Now I make ICC profiles, which are to my mind essential for getting good print quality. I make lots of these when I'm testing a printer, and in fact for the 8550, which is not that well supported for profiles, I've created well over 50 different profiles for different papers that work for the 8550. Now as ever, these are all available on request. See details in the notes. So the profiles, they specify a particular paper on a particular printer with a particular media setting and also a particular ink. Change any of those and the profile is effectively useless. Now, it may work still, but it's not optimal. So effectively, if you put third-party inks into your printer, unless you are going to be doing your own profiling, and that's nothing against that, it's just a bit expensive, bit of a learning curve, but doable, then effectively all of those profiles need remaking for every paper that you want to use. Now, if you only use 1 or 2 papers, it may be worth getting a custom profile made. That also, incidentally, the ICC profiles assume that the ink doesn't vary from month to month. When you put an unknown third-party ink into your printer, you have an unknown level of quality. Now, some cheap dye inks replace so-called compatible inks. Compatible merely means that it won't instantly kill off your printer. It's a marketing term, so always be wary of that term. But some inks like that, some dye-based inks, have been known to fade in combination with some papers in months. When exposed to the air. They just don't have any degree of permanence. And that quality aspect is something that, unless you know you're getting a particularly good ink, and there are good third-party inks, but if you're just going for something on the basis of cheapness, well, that's it. Flip a coin, what's the print quality going to be like? You just don't know. And there is the big problem with it. Now, I mentioned there was a fourth one for why I don't test things. It is that the majority of printers that I test are loans from Canon or Epson. I couldn't afford to buy printers for all the testing I do, nor would I be allowed to live in a printer warehouse. Because of that, they're going to go back to Canon or Epson. They come with ink. If I put some random third-party ink into one of Canon's printers and returned it to them, I suspect that might be the last printer I'd ever be loaned for it. So yeah, there is that as well, but that's just purely related to my testing. So why do people want to use third-party inks? Cost is the main thing. Now, cost varies by printer, and I'll come back to sort of ink tank printers as well, because I said there are some uses for third-party inks in specific uses, which may be of use to you. But in general, in cost, if I look at these little cartridges, these are from the Canon Pro 300, this one here. I'm waiting for a 310 to turn up from Canon. They want to get me a brand new one so I can show testing, initialization and everything. But these are 14 milliliters of ink per cartridge. They're not cheap buying a set of them. And ink costs are appreciable there. Now, excellent printer. Don't have a problem with the printer, but just bear in mind the ink costs. Incidentally, there is an excellent page on Red River Paper's website that addresses the basic costs of printing from an ink use for a whole load of different printers. I haven't checked it recently. I put a note in the notes to the video to the page. It's really useful for getting comparative ink prices because, as I said, that's a cartridge, 14mm. This is an ink cartridge from the P5000 here now. Nearly empty. I needed to swap one out, so this one has just got a little bit in. There's probably more ink in this than there is in one of these cartridges, and this is nearly empty. That's 200 milliliters. Now, you can, and I know of people who've done it, who've been able to do, refill, buy the ink in cartridges like this and put it into smaller cartridges and Epson printers. There are lots of people. Look at that. If you want to find out, have a look on YouTube. There are lots of details of people with lots of experience of doing things like that. These, I noticed, I've just been having a big sort out here. Incidentally, that's one reason why the rate of videos I've been producing has dropped off for the last few weeks. We are in the process of moving home. That means we've got somewhere we're likely to be going to, but it also means that this house, where I've lived here since 1987 and Karen's lived here since 2009, 2008, there's a lot of stuff. So I've had to be doing a lot of clearing out. This office is, you can't see it, but it is massively empty compared to how it's ever been before, as is much of the rest of the house, because it's got to be emptied to enough to photograph it and then to sell it. So I might do some bits about selling houses, taking pictures for that, but not until after we've sold this one. I'll see about that when I've got somewhere new. But anyway, the cartridges, 80mm. These were starter cartridges for this. Now these starter cartridges, 80mm. 80mm is the size of the ink cartridges that you used to get on some P800, for example. P900, I think it's 50mm per cartridge. So, cartridges work out quite expensive, and I can see why people want different options for it. I mentioned refilling cartridges. There are problems because depending on what region of the world you're in, the manufacturers are allowed to go to various lengths to stop you doing that. I know it's more difficult to refill cartridges and use third-party cartridges in the US, for example, but I say check. There are lots of people who've done information about that, about looking at refilling and stuff like that. But in general, cartridges work out relatively expensive. These big printers, the inks are a lot cheaper in these, but the printers themselves cost an awful lot more. Right now, ink tank printers. First up, why are you looking for cheap inks for ink tank printers? The costs of inks in these, this is a Canon G650 I looked at. You can see the 6 inks there. Here's the 8550 from when I was setting one up. There's the ink tank bottles there. The ink is a lot cheaper in these. So it's original inks, so you don't have the profiling problem, doesn't affect your warranties, etc. And it has a consistent quality. Now, the inks vary by printer, but the ink tank printers, why would you even bother? How cheap are you? Why are you trying to save cost? Because if you're going for cheap ink, then presumably you're not worried about paper costs, or are you using cheap paper as well? Or if you're using ultra cheap ink and ultra cheap paper, then I'm going to say quality is well down the list of considerations that you've got, and you're not really bothered about it. Yeah, sure, you can put cheapo ink in these as well, and be even more money saving. But do you really want to? I'd say if you look, and I do look at printers here in terms of printing photos, artwork and stuff. So there is an assumption that you're going to want to print with some degree of quality, predictability, reproducibility. So I think ink tank printers like this, if you're worried about ink costs, this helps. Now the 8550 is currently the best printer I suggest to people as an introduction to getting into serious printing. If you want more quality, then perhaps you consider something like the Pro 300 here or the new 310. But these are more expensive to run. In printing, and I've heard this no end of times from people, when you're learning printing, it helps to be able to experiment, because you will get stuff wrong. I get stuff wrong, but the proportion of stuff I get wrong has dropped dramatically, partly because of all the printers I test. But with something like one of these, you're not really concerned about the extra ink being used to having to run off an extra print. Paper costs are important, so it does make a difference as well. So obviously paper costs are the same for one of these as they would be for one of these. Just obviously the pigment inks in this is a very good printer, and I expect the 310 to be almost identical. But for these, there is a slight problem for if you're a Mac user like I am with the G series, G650, G550 and related numbers, in that there is no proper color management for it. I had to kludge the Canon driver, the approach to color management on this to get good results out of it. So it's a problem. That's why this is one I recommend. This is one more for Windows use. Because basically the Mac printer driver has to use AirPrint, and there's a big problem with AirPrint. Incidentally, there is a problem on Macs with accidentally installing AirPrint. I've addressed this in all the printer reviews and quite a few videos for it as well. But if you find you're using a Mac and you can't use something like Epson Print Layout or the Canon print software, and it doesn't work properly, you've probably installed the AirPrint driver by mistake. But I've got lots of stuff covering that. So ink tank printers seems the way to go. And that's, in many ways, that's it, cut and dried. If you're bothered about ink costs, you want quality, go for something like this. If you want higher quality and you're still worried about ink costs, go for a bigger printer like this, because you'll get bigger ink cartridges, or something like this. But I did say there were some positive reasons why I might choose to use third-party inks. And typically this would be with ink tank printers like this. I would not use third-party inks on something like this. There's no real way I would consider it for something like this. But on the ink tank printers, subject to you not being overly concerned with your warranty, monochrome. I would like to test a monochrome ink set on an 8550. Unfortunately, I do not have a spare 8550 which I'm prepared to set up with monochrome inks. Pity, but if you're into that, there are some good examples. Check the stuff from Farbenwerks. I'll put a link into the notes to that if you want to investigate that further. That's a set of grey inks. You might want to try a set of pigment inks in a printer like this. You're going to have to make your own profiles, but you've got pigment inks. That's a little less down my list of things to try, but it's probably the cheapest fully pigment option you can get in terms of ink costs. But once again, profiling. You will need custom profiling, and you will need to make your own profiles for stuff like that. And there is the warranty question. So it's always a sense of balance and things here. Pigments works fine for that. I'm told it works okay in these. Not tested it, obviously. Lastly, sublimation inks. Now, sublimation inks, because of the nature of the ink, it's a very different ink, and it's a much more reactive ink. So you may get problems in the printer. Now, I've heard of people saying that they buy these printers, ink tank printers from Epson, put sublimation inks, and expect that after 6 months of use the printer will break. Now, if you have it for a business, the next sublimation ink printers are expensive. Now, it's a distinct step up in prices of printers. It may be worthwhile buying cheap printers like this that you know will only last for 6 months and using them for whatever you want. You'll have to do your research on that one, because I know very little about sublimation ink use for this, and the idea of having a printer that I know is going to break in 6 months if I'm lucky, or maybe a bit longer, maybe less, no warranties. So that's where they can potentially use it. So to wrap up on it, ink costs, third-party inks can occasionally be useful, but in general, look at why you think you want third-party inks and at what cost they're coming. For me, really, if I was wanting to save money with something like this, well, why have I bought one in the first place, given what I know about it? But, people do refill cartridges, people do use it, and they get perfectly good prints. For myself, I'd have a problem with a lack of profiles, even though I can make profiles. I don't particularly want to have to make lots and lots of profiles for a printer, and there's the quality issues there. But they have it. Third-party inks, maybe, sometimes, but seriously think about what you want. And if you're looking at third-party inks for basic printing on something like this or something like this, just how cheap are you? Yeah. Definitions of cheapness may vary. Anyway, I hope that was of some interest. Thanks for watching. If you've got any questions, please do let me know. Bye.